up, I gotta look for their name in these, right? Whoever it
If
is.
you say, stand up here and tell us who you are, and then
Right, then I just gotta give them these.
we can do it that way. We can have them come up. You can have them stand, have your name come up, get their certificate, and then. This is any indication of how many people will be here.
It's still early. All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome. We're opening the public hearing for our code of conduct. And at this time, we'll turn it over to Principal Bednair to tell us about the high school. Yes, please.
All right, thank you. I understand you letting me go in front of Mr. Cosmer. I want to delay having to look at a Dallas Cowboys tie as long as you possibly can. I appreciate that. I don't know what kind of poor judgment he would use to come to a board meeting with something like that on, but you have the changes proposed for our code of conduct for this year. It's relatively minimal number of wording changes in a couple of different areas. I just wanted to highlight for you that the first kind of big structural change that we did write into our code of conduct, because it's a change for us in the high school day, is the elimination of homeroom. This year at the high school, we go straight to first period and begin our day, and so the bell schedule is a part of our code of conduct, and so we included that change. That's the first thing that you see reflected there. Really, the majority of the bell schedule has not changed other than first period. It starts 3 minutes earlier than it did before, and we give our homeroom announcements at the end of period 1. So we don't lose any instruction time. The next area that we made changes in the code of conduct is to basically have a little bit of wording that accounts for artificial intelligence in our in the section where we talk about plagiarism and citing your sources. So if you see the wording before in the area that talks about acknowledging your sources, we just kind of tightened that up a little bit and made it specific to refer to words and ideas that are not your own, and how students should be citing their work. We developed this wording in consultation with Liz Fawcett, who's our library media specialist, as well as the committee of teachers teachers and staff members who work on our code changes every year. She drew on her experience from a number of other library media specialists and work that they had done. The second place where that shows up is just below that, where we basically added in the words artificial intelligence to basically make sure that we've tightened up everything in the area of plagiarism or misuse of technology. In the next couple of boxes, you can see that we iterated the due process and student rights for students who are charged with an academic integrity violation. Instead of a bulleted list there, it's a 4-step process, which begins with an investigation and written notice, and then describes the hearing that a student would have with administration should there be any accusation about plagiarizing or not citing sources properly. And then we described the process of an appeal in any of those cases and changed it to 7 business days of the written decision as opposed to 48 hours. And then the final change is relative to cell phones. And again, this is relatively minor. As you know, lots of school districts in the area and really across the country have started to make major changes to their cell phone policy. This year, Mr. Arquette is leading us to run a task force at the secondary level. Ryan Fideli and Marcy are going to be working on a task force with our staff to look at our policy in greater detail and in the scope and spotlight of everything that's gone on in neighboring districts. But the changes that we propose at the secondary level at this year is to just, again, sort of tighten up and be a little bit more direct about students not having their cell phones out at all during the academic day. So we added that phrase, put the cell phones and electronic devices into their book bags before the student enters the classroom, or into pockets. Cell phones may not be used during the academic period, and no phone calls during the school day. So we direct students to come to the office if they need to make a phone call, as we have in the past. So relatively few changes to our cell phone policy, just a couple little word changes, but as I said, still with that process of having a task force with a bunch of stakeholders in the buildings, both at the middle school and the high school level, to really examine what we're doing and look at the research and what's out there about what's happening in other communities and in other states. Some states have moved to legislation, as you know. Ours is, our governor is contemplating that route, and so we may see some more news stories excuse me, that come up over the course of this year, but we're working on that process together. The last set of changes is a couple of sentences that was added in under our dress code portion. This was at the recommendation of our school attorneys based on some incidents that they had seen in other districts that they represent. Nothing specific that happened here in Scotia, but we're putting language in that specifically prohibits wearing capes or flags or any materials that hang from the shoulders and neck, primarily as a safety hazard for people, horseplay, grabbing things that are hanging around their necks, yanking people, and injuries that could come from that. So that was one bullet that we did share with our teachers and staff, but had come on the attorney's recommendation, as I said. Everything else in here was generated out of our conversations with faculty and staff at the end of last year. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can. Pam?
I noticed that you took out the ability of a teacher to allow a student to use their phone. Can you give me the rationale for that and tell me how the teachers think about that?
Well, we basically left them outside of the academic period. We are still allowing them. So if there's
I mean inside the academic period.
Well, we wanted to move towards greater consistency. So in the conversations that we had with faculty at the end of the year talking about the code of conduct, there was a lot of debate back and forth, and in general, the teachers were more in favor of not having the phones being used during the academic day, and they recognize that it's important for us to be 100% consistent on that and not have some allow it and others not allow it. The other factor that has changed in recent years is that we're now one-to-one, and so when in the past some teachers had said, well, I want students to be able to use their phone to be able to do certain things online, we now know that all students have Chromebooks, and so there really isn't a need for anybody to be on their own personal electronic device.
Okay. I figured that was probably the reason, but I
Yeah.
think, whenever you take a right away from the teacher, you should have a good reason for doing that.
Yep.
I don't want to have a grievance that we took this right away from the teachers. The other thing is the handbook that we just received. We haven't seen the new one. I'm assuming you changed the year on the front of the new code of conduct, the student handbook, because the ones we got still have the old.
Well, actually, we haven't yet because it hadn't been approved yet. So I had a few questions about that too, but I left all the language.
Middle school one.
Yeah, I left all the language the same as our previously approved, and I let folks know that once our changes were approved by the board, then we'll re-release it. The good news is we don't print hundreds of copies of these anymore. We do this electronically. We post it on the website. We post it in PowerSchool. We post it to students, through the Google Classroom and so forth.
Well, over the years, I have just seen people forget to change.
Keep the date the same?
Big
Yeah.
number on the front of the handbook, and just want to be sure it got changed.
Yeah, we will once this is all set.
Quick question, would you entertain changing must have their cell phones to may have their cell phones? Just kind of these, you must have your cell phone out during.
Can you point me to where you are?
I'm looking at the revisions document that you sent, but I think it's also.
The page 22.
Page 22, it's just, I hope you don't have anyone in your building who's as much of a wordsmith as I am, because it's a very long day. But that just kind of jumped
Must be used during, oh, I see. Cell phones must be used during, may be used during student lunch periods in the cafeterias. Yep.
Must be used during lunch, et cetera.
Yeah, we don't stand over students and make sure they're on their cell phones. Yep.
Good catch.
I had a couple questions too. Under the due process section on page 12, you added written notice of facts, including possible referral. What does that, including possible referral, mean?
Sometimes these kinds of instances come to us just through talking with a teacher. They may not have written a disciplinary referral, but if evidence goes to the direction of giving the student a consequence, then it would be included on a referral, and so that would be included as part of the process. So I guess.
Is there a way we could write that to make that more clear? Because I would never have guessed that.
Yeah, we could say if a referral is written.
That makes more sense to me. And then also, you took out the third bullet, an explanation of the investigation procedure. Why did you do that, and why would we not want to tell parents and students an explanation of the investigation procedure?
I'm not sure.
I personally think it should remain in, but I'm one person out of 7, so.
I think, yeah, I don't know. I guess I would assume that an investigation, an explanation of the procedure would be included in the written notice that goes home to parents or in an in-person meeting that occurs. But we can include that in number 2, really.
That's, I don't have an issue.
You could even put number 2 in with number 3, though, written notice of the facts and evidence regarding the charges and an explanation of the investigative procedure.
Yep.
It's kind of even clearer if you put the 2 together.
Yep, that makes sense to me.
Can
And then
keep-
under the dress code, hoodies, where do they fall? Because they could also be a hazard, but I know that they're
Yeah,
not
we-
permitted. My son would be devastated if they weren't.
Yeah, they're still permitted. We haven't, I mean, you're right. I guess people grabbing the hoods, that we haven't seen that happen yet, so we're not.
Not that I'm suggesting it.
Yeah, no, hoodies are still allowed.
So should we put something in there that hoodies are not included in this? Because I think, to me, I think that they hang from the shoulders and neck. So I think that an exclusion for hoodies should happen.
I think maybe we could just, say that that's part of the garment. Really what we're trying to avoid is people adding things to their clothing or tying things around their neck, that kind of thing. I don't think any student would be, we certainly haven't called anybody out for anything that's part of their clothing, part of the garment that they're wearing.
I remember, granted, he was in elementary school, he was not in high school, but my son had several shirts where the cape was attached to the shirt.
Yeah,
Somebody
safety
never
pinned
put
or
it
whatever,
on.
yeah.
I'm not saying high school students are doing that, I'm just thinking it's a similar vein as hoodies, in my opinion. So
Well,
I don't know if he needs to necessarily put it there, but somewhere saying hoodies are permitted, or it is somewhere else in the code, because I just got the full, and that's on me to look now.
Yeah, it may be. I actually don't know.
I didn't see it, but that doesn't mean it's not in there.
But we haven't had any questions about that so far.
I have a question for cell phone. So parents that came to me and told me that their kid has diabetes, and have a monitor on their shoulder, or whatever it may be, and use a cell phone as a device to kind of tell them about it live.
Yep.
So where would that fall under that? Hold the cell phone out, the phone starts going off, saying, hey, your blood sugar is low, or what have you.
Yeah, I don't think it's in this. I don't think it's in this section here, but in a newsletter that I sent home and that Mr. Cosmer sent home, we have a medical exemption clause in the phrase that we used. So I think it may be elsewhere in the code, related to cell phones. This was just the part that we chose to, or that we had changes for. But I know Bob and I both use the same language in our parent newsletter that we sent home, which said, with exception for medical devices. And we've dealt with that in testing circumstances before Regents exams, where we've had to keep we usually put the cell phone on the table in the front of the room just to remove it from the student, but the parent can still see the transmission that might come if their monitor goes off.
One more thing. So the elimination of homeroom. Where did that come from? Where was that decision made? Why?
It's been a conversation that we've had at the high school for several years, actually, even predating COVID. But as we've sort of come back out of COVID, I'm not saying it's related to COVID, we've had more conversations about two main reasons. One, to encourage attendance, and two, to eliminate an extra transition of passing in the bells. The transition times are the most unstructured parts of our day. We feel like we can limit liability for horseplay and goofiness to happen by eliminating an extra transition. The other thing related to attendance is that we would have students that would frequently miss homeroom or just skip homeroom altogether. And it became, we would assign consequences for skipping homeroom, but it became really hard to use progressive discipline and escalate the consequences up to a really high level when students and frankly parents would say, what's the importance of homeroom? Why they're not missing any class. In some cases, we had parents who wouldn't drop their students off until after homeroom was over or had already begun. And so homeroom was also the anchor period for our attendance for state reporting. And so we've shifted that to first period now, and the school day just starts. And so if students are late for the school day, it actually pushes it back a few minutes too, which I think is good for high schoolers. But if students are late for first period, they're late for a class. And so I think there's just a little bit more importance on that.
Now, wasn't the homeroom teacher the one that they go to at all times for any, like the main person, or no?
Not really. Not really. At the high school, yeah, it's not as much a home base anymore. It's really just a space to listen to the announcements, the pledge to the flag, and maybe pick up any papers that were being handed out. We do a lot less paper handouts than we used to because of our communication systems, but if we do need to give something out, we just give it to the list of first period teachers.
Right. All right, thank you.
So, yeah, it just gets us into our day. We've only been through 3 days of school, but it's gone pretty smoothly so far. And I would say the vast majority of teachers were really on board with this. They were happy to eliminate another transition and happy to just get the day up and rolling. So we put the announcements at the end of first period so that if students are coming in late, and just teachers can get the day started, and then at the tail end of the period, they hear the announcements for the day.
All right, thank you.
I've been hearing a lot of positive things from the students as well. I think they like not
About that?
having the homerooms.
Yeah, it's honestly, it really wasn't that needed anymore, and it's one less thing for us to argue about and chase people around on. So it's been kind of nice.
I thought I saw it in here, and now I'm not finding it, with the language about, maybe it was a totally different document, but about traveling to away sports games and leaving with either on the bus or with a parent or guardian. Was that in here? Well, the reason I'm bringing it up
I think
is,
so.
I did hear from one parent who said, now I don't remember the exact date, something about they had asked for that permission and they hadn't heard, they wanted to know what the time frame was, like if it's the day of the game and they're actually at the event, what is the time frame in which they can get that permission?
Are you talking about parents taking another child home other than their own, or?
Or to someone other than like
Than a parent
an
or
aunt
guardian.
or an uncle or something, if they weren't already on the list, that they didn't feel like there was.
So the rule is that parents and guardians can take their own children home as long as they sign them out with the coach from the event. Someone else bringing a parent or child home that is not their own parent or guardian needs permission from Susan.
Okay,
And that's granted through an email generally.
okay. We can talk about this later, but I guess the next question is there a time frame for that?
I heard them almost right up until their
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, she's very good about getting that back to people.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, folks. Can you hear me? Okay? All right. I don't really want to retort back at Mr. Bednarik at his disparaging comments about my tie. It is a Dallas Cowboys tie. What I would point out, though, I am wearing a Scotia-Glenville tartan pin, which I don't see on him. Okay, so I'll just point that out. Sorry. Okay. I'm relatively brief because we only have really one change, and we kind of already touched upon it. And it's on page 20 of our code of conduct. And Pam, you asked a good question for Mr. Bednarik, and I'll answer that question. He answered it correctly. The reason why we in the middle school want to just remove that little asterisk, couple sentences there in regards to having teachers have the right to allow cell phones in a class is because there really isn't a purpose for a cell phone for an instructional purpose, since we are one-to-one. We have Chromebooks. So given that, there really isn't a reason for that asterisk anymore. That was something that we put in, obviously, prior to being one-to-one. Also on that same page, Mr. Singh, on page 20, just going back to the medical devices, Mr. Bednarik was correct that the language is in both our codes that basically says other than intended for instruction or medical use. So that is there as well. So that is the only change at the middle school that we have. We don't have many changes because I don't have that many things to firm up like the high school does, obviously. So I would entertain any questions you have.
I had a question because I thought that there was a change on page 22 with respect to ISS. I thought I saw some highlights on there. I'm going back to look. Let's see. Because it,
Top of the page?
yeah, the top of the page on page 22 for the time, I think.
That's it, so that's it.
Hope you may be correct.
Oh, here it is.
From period 4.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm doing the numbers on the bottom of my screen versus on the page itself. Okay, in-school suspension begins at 9:59 and ends at 2:20. Why does it not start until almost 10 a.m.? Why aren't they starting at the beginning of the school day?
Couple reasons for that, and I'm just going to be blatantly honest. First, it's a staffing constraint. Right now, believe it or not, at the middle school, I don't even have an ISS teacher. I still have to hire that TA. So it's that person also will have morning responsibilities, supervisory, like study halls, library, 504 test mods, and things like that. So I can't have someone. I still need an extra body to do the supervisories in the morning. Myself and Mr. Bednarik, we share a TA in the morning, but it's certainly just not enough for the number of students that I have with open periods in the morning. That's the first thing. The second thing is we usually run a half-day ISS, as does the high school, because we made that change many years ago, because if we do a half-day of ISS, it doesn't count against us as a full day of suspension. Whereas if we did 2 days ISS, it's only 1 day of suspension out of class.
Okay, two questions. So what happens to the student from the start of school till 9:59 a.m.? They're on their own?
They go to class.
Okay, so they're still
Yeah,
in
no,
school.
yeah, I'm sorry.
It's just not, okay.
They-
That was where I was concerned. I was like,
Yeah.
how did they get to school? Where are they?
Yeah.
Are they not getting a full day? But you're saying they're going to class up
Yep.
until 9:50. Okay.
They come to school, have their breakfast, go to homeroom. Typically, the ISS TA has also a period in the morning, part of it, as a planning period to gather all the work from the teachers for that student that's in ISS. So it's not a lost day. They can obviously get their work done as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? I will, just one last thing about the cell phone. In my communication on August 27th to families, I did, for those folks that have middle schoolers, you would have seen, I did put a paragraph in there just kind of reiterating that, like Mr. Bednarik said, across the country, certainly some of our neighboring districts are going to more strict cell phone policies. But I did remind our folks that at the middle school, we in fact have in the code of conduct a no cell phone policy already instilled in the code of conduct. The only caveat being that asterisk piece. So if we were to go to something more stringent, it should not be a real heavy leap for the middle school population.
And I'm sorry, one last question. I know you're middle school, but I heard a rumor that you're the lucky one that got to gather all the codes of conduct. If I'm wrong on that, I assume all the elementary ones are just sort of the same exact thing from last year.
I was not.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
essentially, Joe.
Oh, sorry. They're the same as last year?
Together for
Okay.
elementary.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Any other questions for the middle school?
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I have a question. Was there cell phone policy in for the elementary students also?
Nothing has changed in the elementary code. Mr. Strong was the person who headed up the revisions for elementary. My understanding is that each of the schools met and no one sent him anything that they wanted to be updated or changed, that folks were feeling very comfortable and confident with what they had. You're welcome.
I had one question about the elementary handbook. There's quite a bit of detail about the lunch pricing. I thought meals were free.
Everybody's free.
Everybody's free to.
What's that?
We'll take a look at that.
Okay.
That's a good catch up.
Yeah. I mean, you could just say for the school year 24-25, but all students, just a little notice there.
I had a question with the, I guess, task force, and you know how far we are with that, or just started for the cell phone?
They're gonna have their first meeting the end of this month.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments about any of the code of conducts? All right, so we will close the public hearing at 6:44.